Hey folks! So today we're gonna do something a little different. I gave a presentation the other day at Titan, the company I work for, about Hotwire Native, and I thought it would be cool to record a version for the channel. And yeah, so this is the presentation. So let's dive right in. So this talk is gonna be about Hotwire Native, but I'm gonna touch on some Hotwire aspects as well because I think there is some confusion around what's Hotwire and does it englobe the native part or not? So I want to try to clarify that a little bit. So this is the agenda for the presentation. We're going to talk about, first, before we talk about Hotwire Native, I'm going to give an introduction to Hotwire, and I'm going to cover some of the new aspects of Turbo 8. And also we are going to talk about the starter kit, and then we jump right into the Hotwire Native presentation, the actual presentation. So first, before we talk about Hotwire Native, let's do a Hotwire deep dive, like 5 minutes-ish. This is a lie, but it's gonna take a little bit more than 5 minutes, but I wanted to give it anyways. So Hotwire is an alternative approach for building modern web applications with minimal JavaScript or without much JavaScript, as they say. When folks hear that, like minimal JavaScript or without much JavaScript, they focus too much on that part, in my opinion, and it almost feels like they listen to that and think, oh, it's no JavaScript, so it's a way to build web applications with just my server-side language and all that. And in some cases, you're able to do just that, but most of the time we are writing JavaScript. So this is not actually a no JavaScript kind of framework or policy or anything like that. It actually relies heavily on JavaScript, but the JavaScript that we have to write when we are building a Hotwire application is we write way less JavaScript than usual. So Hotwire consists of 3 libraries: Turbo, Stimulus, and Hotwire Native. Turbo is perhaps the core of Hotwire, but in order to use Hotwire Native, you need both Turbo and Stimulus connected. So Hotwire Native is built on top of those with some custom native code around it. So we'll see more about that in a little bit, but the core of Hotwire is in Turbo itself. Turbo is a JavaScript library that allows us to build multi-page applications, MVC applications, server-side rendered applications. It allows us to build that, and it turns multi-page applications into something that looks and behaves like a single-page application. So what Turbo will do, and this is the aspect of, and inside Turbo, this is handled by Turbo Drive, which is one of the libraries or components of Turbo itself. Turbo Drive will hijack any link click and form submissions that happens in the page, and instead of letting the browser handle that automatically, it will do that. It will convert that into fetch requests. So it will turn links and forms into fetch requests, JavaScript fetch requests. It makes the fetch request, it gets the body of the response and swaps the current document's body with the new one that it got from the response. And just this aspect of Turbo is already really powerful because it boosts the perceived performance of our application. It's still the same response time in our application, in our server side, but the browser will not have to download the CSS, the JavaScript, and all that it already got from the previous document, and will not have to process that. So it just replaces the body, and that's basically it. So it behaves and feels much faster as you use the application, as you navigate around the application with Turbo Drive. And we don't have to do anything. We just install Turbo and start the Turbo process. And just that will turn our multi-page application into a single-page application behavior feel like. There's another component of Turbo is Turbo Frames. A Turbo frame, it's just a custom HTML tag. So when we install Turbo, it gives us this HTML tag, this new tag that we can use. And with that, we can wrap certain sections of our page and give it its own kind of rendering cycle. And also fetching cycle. So what a Turbo frame does, and you need to add an ID, at least an ID to a Turbo frame. There are other attributes that we can add to tuple frames as well, but we need at least the ID. What a tuple frame will do is that it will tell tuple drive that it's not supposed to replace the entire body. Instead, it should look for a matching tuple frame with the same ID on the response and replaces just that. So any link clicks and form submits that happens either inside of the tuple frame or they are pointing to that tuple frame, we can target specific tuple frames from outside the frame itself. Any links or forms that get activated like that, they will trigger this behavior. So instead of replacing the entire body, they replace just a section of the page. And that's cool because the rest of the page remains untouched. So if you have event listeners or state in some elements around the tuple frame, it's not touched, so it stays as it was before. And this is also cool because we can decompose a complex page into a few tuple frames and give each section its own caching, HTTP caching and server-side caching strategy around that specific portion of the page. So we can do all that with tuple frames, which is really cool. Another component of tuple is tuple streams. So a tuple stream is just like frames. Tuple streams are another custom HTML tag that we can use once we install tuple into our application. And with tuple streams, and to activate a tuple stream, we just have to add it to the body somewhere. And a tuple stream has an action attribute and a target, which is the DOM ID of the element that we are performing this action on. Or you can also specify the plural targets over here and give it a CSS selector, so you can target multiple elements or just a single element using a CSS selector instead of a DOM ID if you want to. But the idea is a tuple stream, once it gets activated, it will perform the action that you want it to do. So it will append an item to a list, it will replace an item, it will remove an element from the page, it will cause a page refresh. That's also one tuple stream that we can do. And what's cool about this is that we can also broadcast using WebSockets or something like that to multiple different clients. So let's say you send a message to a chat, and in the backend we can broadcast that this same HTML that we might return to the user that sent a message, we might be able to just broadcast that to everyone connected into this chat room, and they will see the new message popping up, and it's the exact same tuple stream HTML that we broadcast there. So yeah, to activate the tuple stream, we just append it to the body, and it self-activates and removes the element from the DOM and all that. So that's about it. These are the core components of tuple. In tuple 8, there were some new additions to this, which is, as I was saying, page refreshes. So page refreshes is really cool. We can activate a page refresh on specific pages or globally in the application, but usually that happens in specific pages that are very dynamic in nature. We can activate that, and it will use morphing. And whenever something happens that causes a redirect to the same page that a tuple was on, if you submit a form and that form redirects you back to the same page that you were on, tuple will perform a page refresh instead of replacing the body. So you will actually use morphing, and those changes will happen just much faster. And also with morphing, we are able to animate certain things that were not possible before. So if you have a progress bar, for instance, that's constantly you get pulling, if you're just using the old way, which is the body replacement, you cannot animate the progress bar evolving or increasing the percentage there, because every time you replace, it's a new element, so we can't really animate new elements like that. But if we're using morphing, it's actually the same element, just the value attribute that gets incremented, and that's really cool. So we have morphing available. We also page refreshes. We also are able to broadcast page refreshes to other users. So there's that as well. We can broadcast a tuple stream either to you or to anyone we want, and that will trigger tuple to perform a page refresh in that client. We also have view transitions, and now this is a new CSS thing. We are able to transition a page to another page and animate some elements moving around and stuff like that. So this is also available in Turbo 8. And we also have prefetching of links on hover by default. So whenever we are hovering any links, Turbo will make a GET request to that href, that source, and then if you click on that link, it just replaces the body and it feels instant. So it all behaves way faster than before. There is the downside though, that as the users hover around the page, you get a lot of requests on your backend, so you need to pay attention to your HTTP caching and your server-side caching as well. But if you're doing those things, your application will just, it will feel instant. Let's put it like that. You can see that around in Basecamp. Like if you use Basecamp, you can hover around and it will make a bunch of requests. But I think most of those requests are returned at 3 or 4. So all those requests can be cached by the browser or by a proxy server or anything like that. You can also disable this behavior if you don't want to. You can disable it globally, or you can disable it per link and stuff like that. So yeah, this is the introduction to Turbo part, but I also wanted to cover Stimulus because I don't think I've talked about Stimulus that much. Stimulus is a modest client-side framework, let's put it like that. It doesn't try to hijack any behavior. It doesn't try to force you into building, I don't know, into rendering cycles or anything like that. Stimulus is based on HTML and HTML elements. So if you understand web components or custom elements, you will understand the Stimulus because the APIs on Stimulus are very similar to the APIs in web components. But I wanted to give a brief introduction here. So the Stimulus documentation has this example, and I'm gonna use that. So it's a copy to clipboard feature. So usually for this feature, we have an element on the page, and that element has an input type text that is read only, and it has a value. And we also have the button that the user clicks to copy to clipboard. And on the JavaScript side, we have a Stimulus controller, which is just a class that extends the base controller from Stimulus, Hotwire Stimulus. And over here, we are defining some targets. If you're used to Vue, Alpine, or React, a target is like a ref in those frameworks. So it's a reference to an element on the page that it's bound to this alias that we can use to interact with that element. So we also have an action over here. An action is a method that can be invoked by event listeners or by other controllers. And in this action, when this action is invoked, we are getting the value of the source target. This is the syntax that we can use to interact with a target. So it's the name of the target and this suffixed by the target word. If we have multiple targets, we can bind multiple targets to the same target name. We can use the plural of that and it will return an array for us. But the idea is we can get the value of the source target, which is the input, and we will write that to the clipboard, to the navigator's clipboard. So this is the behavior that we want. So to hook the Stimulus controller to our HTML element, we just have to annotate the markup, the HTML, with some specific attributes. So the controller has a name, which we register, and we can specify that name in the data controller on the component that we want to wrap. You will also be able to reference this element inside the controller as this element if you want to. But yeah, so, and also you can specify multiple controllers on the same element. So you just separate that by a space, and that will, all those controllers will be registered. That's actually common. And you have an input over here where we are defining the source target for the clipboard controller. So this is the syntax for that. And over here we are registering an event listener. What is cool about this data action thing is that we don't have to care about adding or removing the event. As soon as the element enters the DOM, the event listener will be activated and will be able to, and the action will be executed. In this case, we are registering that event listener in a button element, so we don't actually have to specify the event if we are targeting the default events. And there are certain elements in Stimulus have default events, So we don't have to specify the event name, but you could specify if you wanted to, or if you're targeting a different event than the default one, you'd probably specify that. And since this is a button, the default event is the click. So whenever a click happens, this action over here, copy on the clipboard controller, will be executed. So this is the whole feature. Like there is a stimulus controller over here, and this is a source attribute, a source target, and we have an event listener in the button. So if you click on it, it gets the value of the input gets added to your clipboard, and that's it. That's a stimulus in a nutshell. There's more to stimulus than just that, than just targets and actions and event listeners, but I feel like that's enough for us. But there are other things. Just know that there are values which are state that gets synced into the HTML, so it gets stored in the page cache. And there is also CSS classes that we can hook, we can pass along to stimulus. And there is outlets, which is a way to communicate between two different controllers in the same page. So there's a lot more, but the API surface for stimulus is very narrow, and that's intentional because we don't need much, honestly. And you feel that once you use Hotwire for the first time, or once you get used to Hotwire. There is one page that I wanted to mention in the stimulus documentation, which is this one, Designing for Resilience. It's really good and I highly recommend it. It's something that we often neglect as software developers, and in this world that we have right now, where internet is mostly always available for us. But this is basically using CSS, a mix of CSS and JavaScript, to progressively enhance the experience of the user. And this is not just like, whenever I mention this, folks usually reply, oh, but nobody actually disables JavaScript in the browser. And that's fine. I know that just very few people actually disable JavaScript, but there are other reasons that your JavaScript may not run in the browser. Maybe the CDN is out, maybe there was a network hiccup and the JavaScript wasn't able to download, or maybe there was a bug in your JavaScript and that caused the JavaScript in the user's page to break, so your application doesn't actually behave as you intended. So there's like a lot of reasons besides just someone disabled JavaScript that would be good for our users if we handled it correctly and in the best way we could. And that's all this page talks about. It talks about old browsers as well as handling and progressively enhancing the experience of the user as they use our application. Yeah, so that's stimulus, that's doable. A couple days ago, I released a Hotwire starter kit for Laravel, and it was well received, but I got some comments in the video that I posted, the introduction that I posted, that had some confusion around it. Some folks thought the title was misleading, some folks didn't understand Hotwire, and I wanted to fix that, and that's why I gave this presentation actually. So this is now the time that we are going to talk about Hotwire Native. So as I said right in the beginning, and this is stated in the docs, like in the first page of Hotwire, and this is the core of this thing. So they are building web and mobile clients with a single code base, or driven by this single monolithic application, which is Rails, and in our case Laravel over here. So the idea is that the mobile client, a Hotwire native application, the way it works is it will build a native shell around the application. So everything that we see with dots over here with the bubbles, that's fully native. So the navigation over here is native, but the purple with stripes sections over here, they are actually web content. So this is a web view. So it's a web view around a native shell. In most cases, this is what you have, but you can also have like other types of screens. So maybe one of your screens has a floating action button and a bottom navigation, and that's fully native. And that's okay, that's what Hotwire is for. But other screens are fully native, and we can also do that in Hotwire. So that's what I wanted to show y'all. So to create a Hotwire native application, it's just like creating an actual native application for the platforms that you are targeting to build the application for. So in this case, we are seeing over here the getting started for an Android application. So you create an Android project in Android Studio, and the documentation, the getting started documentation, guides you through this process of actually creating the application. First, you have to download Android Studio, and then you can create the application, of course. But the steps are like create a project, add the tuple dependency, set the permissions in the Android manifest, in the case of Android, and replace the activity that comes with the sample application, with the scaffolded application, with the one that they have in the documentation there. And that's it. And this is the bare minimum code for getting a Hello World native application. This is Kotlin, by the way. And the iOS story is actually much simpler than the Android one. So you just create a project in Xcode and you add the dependency and you replace or update the scene delegate that ships with the application that's created in Xcode. And this is the bare minimum code that you can use to get your Hello World Hotwire native application going in iOS. Oh, you also need a Mac, of course. So the first thing to notice in a Hotwire native application is the navigation aspect. So on the web, we saw that a tuple drive will replace the body and hijack link clicks and form submissions and replace the body of the screen and all that. But mobile navigation works a little different. Tuple drive on the web also updates the history API, so you can use the browser back and forward buttons. So that works as you expect it to. But on the mobile side, the story is a little different. So mobile navigation is stack based. So first you load a screen and then another screen pops up, and then you navigate to another page and another screen pops up, and that will pile up, and then you can go back by swiping right or like hitting the back button on Android, and that will just pop the screen from the stack and you see the previous screen, and then you go back again and it pops the screen and all that until you reach the root. So what Hotwire Native does is it will intercept the tuple drive navigation and it will make it look like a native navigation. So it will actually take a screenshot of the current screen that you're viewing, and it will create that same behavior of stacking. So it will stack a new fragment on top of what you're seeing, a new screen on top of what you're seeing, and that screen just has the same web view that you are navigating on, but it will keep the same behavior of stacking screens as you navigate around. And then when you pick behind, you'll see the previous screen that you were on, but it doesn't actually have that because this is, remember, it's using the same web view. So you wouldn't be able to see the page behind it because it's the same web view and all that. So that's why it uses the screenshot to create that illusion that you can see the previous page. And that actually works really well once you use an application, a Hotwire application. And yeah, so when you navigate back, it's replaced the screenshot with the web view, and then it uses page caching and all that to show you the previous navigation. So Hotwire Native will handle all that for you, so you don't have to do anything pretty much. And another component, another thing to mention is the path configuration. So path configuration is a JSON file that we use to configure the path navigation, the navigation destination. It's like a routes file for a web application, but for the mobile side. So over here we can define some rules which has URL patterns, and we can control which screens will be rendered for the users. So this is actually the fragment, the web fragment, which is the default one. So over here we have a wildcard. So any route that doesn't have another pattern registered, like that doesn't match any other pattern, will match on this one, and the web fragment will be rendered. But over here, as you can see, we have a pattern for any URL that ends with /create or /edit or /delete, and that will use a modal context. And this is not a web modal, this is actually a native modal. So remember when screens stack up, so they form a pile of screens, right? A modal, it overlays on top of the screen. It doesn't actually get added to the stack. So it's something that can show up and get dismissed, and it won't cause any won't disturb the stack navigation. So this is useful for forms or for content that is not worth it adding to the stack, basically. So Hotwire Native also has a set of modals by default that we can use. So I'm using the modal sheet in this example, but yeah, we can use the actual normal modal. The modal sheet it's not a full screen modal, it's just a bottom navigation, bottom modal sheet and all that. But we can use the full screen modal for that, or that's kind of stuff. Okay, so once we get the hello world done, and remember, it's just like a 15 lines of code in the path configuration, which we can do, which is just a JSON file with at least one row, which is the wildcard one. We can start integrating our web application, augmenting that, and using native controls, actual native features. So for instance, if we have an upload field, we can start and integrate that upload, which is on the web, we can integrate that with the user's camera or the media files. And the code to do this integration is on your left over here. So it's actually just the input type file. It has the capture attribute, and we are limiting to only images in this case, but it also supports video and all that. So if you have that code in your web application and the user tries to interact with that file, with that input, guess what? Your phone knows how to interact with web applications. So it will show the native controls. It will show the user, it will prompt the user to either take a new photo or upload one from the gallery, and you don't have to do anything to get that working. Like, it just works. So that's true for date pickers as well. So if you have an input type date, the phone version will just use the default date picker from your phone, which is really good. And also time pickers work as well. So there is a thing called virtual keyboards that we can use. And you can see that this is an old thing, but it's been around for a long time. Our phones, our smartphones, they know how to interact with web applications, and they offer this virtual keyboards for us to use, and we just have to use them, and that's it. Like, we don't have to do anything. We don't have to implement any native code. The application will behave just like any web application would, and also, honestly, any native application would also behave the same way. Just saying. Like, the date picker that they show is actually the date picker from the phone. So yeah, I mean, it works. But that's cheating, right? I'm showing you how to build native integrations, but that's actually cheating. I'm relying on the fact that the phone knows how to interact with web applications. These are not native integrations. Well, that's where Hotwire Native has another thing that we can use if we want to. So Hotwire allows us to augment our web applications with native components. And it's like we'll have a web component, and web component, I don't actually mean web components as in custom elements. I mean web JavaScript element or anything like that. And we can send message to the native side. So remember, we have a native shell. So we can send message to this native shell for these web components. And we can say, instead of showing the web version of the component, we can say, let's do that fully native. And then when the user interacts with the native component that we show them on the native shell, we can send back messages to the web view about the interaction of the user with that native component. So it will feel way better than actually interacting with web views. And yeah, so as I said, the bridge components, they are component based. They are all also about messaging. So the native shell doesn't actually know or care about the HTML that is on the web view. It's all message based. So the web view will send a message to the bridge, and on the bridge side, it will execute native code. So we don't have to run any JavaScript from the native. We just have to listen to messages and reply back to those messages that we got after we did the native side of it. And it's also opt-in. So So if you're working on your application and you're adding a new feature that has a new bridge component, if you ship that web version, the clients, they don't actually have the bridge component yet, because if you add a new component, a new native code, you have to go through the Apple or the Google Store, the Play Store review cycle. So you have to submit your native client to another review cycle, so you have to wait. But you don't have to wait. You can ship your feature with the web view controls and wait for the review cycle. And once your app gets approved, the users will start using the bridge component, so you can hide the web part of it, but it still have the component using the native navigation there. So it's all up to you. We're going to see a feature over here. So the feature that we're going to see is what we are calling the form component. Depending on the size of your form, your page might actually scroll. So in this case, we have the save button at the bottom of your screen. So if you scroll, the user won't actually see the save button, so they might get confused. Or if they're typing something, well, they don't see the save button anywhere in the page, so they might get confused by that. Would be cool if we could lift up that button to the native navigation, and once you click on the native button, which it's always visible on top of your screen, so once the user clicks on the save button, it actually communicates with the save button in the web view, which is hidden via CSS. So it submits the form on the web view, and we can do that kind of stuff with bridge components. Bridge components are way more powerful than that, but this is a good example of that. So to do that, we'll just have to create a stimulus controller. So we need the web component, which uses the stimulus. It uses the Hotwire Native bridge, which is built on top of stimulus. That's why I mentioned that Hotwire Native is built on top of Turbo and stimulus. So a bridge component is just like a stimulus controller, but it has some more stuff. It's just built on top of stimulus controllers. So we give it a name. This is the file name, so it will be created in a bridge folder, and the controller will be called form. So it will get the form underscore controller suffix. And we also give it name over here, which is the name of the native bridge component that we want to connect these web components to. So in this case, we are going to call it form. So that's what we are referencing here. So this will create for us a stimulus controller. By the way, this is using the stimulus Laravel package. The Laravel package, the stimulus Laravel package adds some generators to help you create this stuff quickly. So the bridge component that we just created, the form component, and as I said, it's just a stimulus controller, but it extends a different class. So it will extend the bridge component class from the Hotwire Native bridge. And we can use the same stuff that we have in stimulus, which is targets, actions, values, and all that, but it works a little different. So in this case, we have to specify, this is the name that we specified in the make command. So it's a form. So this is the name of the native component that this web component will talk to. Whenever an element that uses this component enters the DOM, it will call the connect. And whenever it connects, we are getting the element, the submit target, which should be bound to the DOM. And we are extracting a data bridge attribute from it called title. And we are sending that title to the connect message to the form native component. So this is sending a message to the native side of Hotwire, so to the form component. And we can send data to the native side as well. And over here, we have a callback. So the component, the native component, can reply back to the web view, to this message that we sent. So this callback will be executed. It's not just that, it can also send data. So we can receive the data that the native side sent and do whatever we want with that data. So on our web application, we have this form, this profile form. This is the stream now version of that. But now we just have to annotate and use the data controller bridge form over here in the form, and we have to register the bridge form target, the submit target over here as the submit button. So in this case, on the web, we may see save changes, but on the native side, we might want to see something different, something shorter perhaps. So a save is enough In this case, it could be like delete or something like that. Anyways, so this is the title that will be sent to the form, so it can use that as text in the native button. Yeah, so this is the opt-in part, right? So we can have this CSS over here, and whenever the Hotwire native side starts, it sets some attributes in our document, so in the HTML tag. So in this case, it will register all the components that it has available in the client for the version that the user is using. In this case, we are saying like if the bridge component, if the form bridge component exists, so if the client supports it, we get any element that is using this bridge form controller, we are referencing the submit button on this element and we are hiding it. So this is what we're doing. So if it supports the form bridge component, get any submit button of the bridge form and hide it. This way we can, if the client doesn't support the form button, the user will still be able to see the save button at the bottom, which still works. So on the native side, we have to create a class, and this is perhaps one of the downsides. So you have to know a little bit about the platform that you're building for. And it's not actually that much, to be honest, but you need to learn a little bit of Kotlin and a little bit of Swift if you're building the iOS part. So to create the form component, the native side of the bridge component, it's just a class that extends the bridge component, and this is boilerplate stuff, and then we just need the onReceive message. So once we register this component in our Hotwire native application, it will start listening to events. We'll be able to send. In this case, we are sending the connect event, which is the event that we send from this JavaScript. So when we send that connect event, this handle connect event will be called. So in this case, we are deserializing the data that we sent from the JavaScript over here. This is how we do that in Kotlin. And there is more code over here to create the button and add it to the toolbar. It's in the example in the source code, but I omitted over here because it just takes a little bit more space, but it's not that complicated. And then we'll get the submit button, the native submit button, and we'll set the text to the title that came from the web application. And we're also setting an event on click listener on this button. So whenever the user presses the native button, we'll reply back to the connect message. So will close this circuit, right? So the web sends a message, a connect message, which gets the button to appear in the title bar. When the button is pressed, that's the native client will reply back to that connect message, which gets the web form button to be clicked. The last part is just registering the components, so we'll see more about that in a little bit. But you don't have to build the components yourself. Joe Mazzilotti, the Hotwire native guy, he has this bridge components library over here. There's a lot of free components on this library, but there's also paid components. But we can use the free stuff from this library. But yeah, the idea is we can use this communication, this messaging communication, to do a lot of stuff. So we can have a button like get my location button on the web view that when you press sends a message to the native client and asks for the location, and the user will be prompted to share the location with the application. This is the native prompt. So they can share the location, and once we get the location, we can send it back to the web view, and that callback can set some hidden fields and submit a form with the hidden fields. So it's like we can do a lot of stuff with this approach, honestly. Like we can use it to get the phone's notification token, so we can send actual push notifications to the native client. Would have a button there to enable notification or something like that, and then the user would allow the notification, which would give us a token, so we can send that message back to the web view with a token, which gets added to the form and submitted as a web request as normal. So there's like, this is really powerful. Once you get a gist of how it all works, the mechanics work, it's really, really powerful. Another aspect of Hotwire native is that we can build native screens, fully native screens. These are not web view screens. And we can do that in a URL base. So we can, for instance, I don't actually have any example of native screens, but in the demo they have this /numbers route, which loads a screen that shows 10 numbers on the web version, but on the native side, they actually have a fully native numbers fragment. So the native, once Hotwire Native visits any routes ending with /numbers, it won't present a web view. It will actually present a fully native screen to the user. So in the native screens, they show 100 numbers, for instance. And yeah, we can do that per URL, so per page actually. So if one page has a specific interaction that we think would work better or would benefit from a native screen, then we can do just that screen and leave everything else, like the settings form, the edit profile, and everything else using web views, and focus on just building that one screen that actually really matters. And so this is the power of Hotwire Native, honestly. So yeah, now it's the demo part. All right, so this is the demo. I have a Hotwire application, Laravel application over here. It's using the starter kit. So we have a new Sharps route over here with a Sharp application built. So we can create, let me remove this stuff over here, this existing Sharps. So we can create hello world and all of that. We can edit the Sharp, changed, and we can do that in line as well. There is also the settings part, so you can edit your profile. So you can see over here that we have a preview over here. We can also see that we are using the date picker, and this is using the native date picker elements and time picker elements from the browser. We have also a select field over here, and yeah, that's the application. That's sure. We also have themes over here on the web. So on the mobile side, there's like a handful of classes that I created, and this is all based on the Hotwire Native demo application, the Android one. So I'm just going to, let's see the URL that we are using over here. Yes, that's correct. So I'm just going to run the emulator over here and move this emulator to the side. I think it's loading. Yeah, it's still building. Okay, so the application will boot and we'll have the application load on mobile over here. So yeah, as you can see, this is the Laravel screen. So we are showing the web Laravel. This also has the light mode, like that stuff also works. So we can log in, and now we get to see the web application. So this is actually the same application that we see over here on the side. So let me move this to the side. Okay, so as you can see, this is the same application, right? So we are hiding this stop part, we are hiding the native navigation over here, and we are showing some custom navigation items over here. If I delete this Sharp over here, you can see that it actually gets deleted on the other side because we are using broadcasting, we are using reverb. So we can create a new Sharp over here, hello from native, save, and that gets created, that gets added to the web view version as well. So we can change, we can edit it over here, changed, and that gets broadcasted to the native sites. And we didn't actually have to do anything on the native. It's just the same broadcasting. This is actually reverb and echo and all that. That's actually how it's all working. So what you see over here is you see the native navigation bar, the toolbar, and we see a bottom navigation as well and a floating action button. This everything around the web view is actually fully native. Also, you might have noticed that when I press the drop down over here, it's not actually the web drop down that you see here. It's a fully native drop down. So this has its own bridge component for that, and it's based on the one from the demo. So if we open a drop down component, this component ships with Hotwire starter kit. So if we open that, you can see that we have a bridge menu over here, and when a link click happens in the summary, which like this is a detailed summary element, so when a link click happens there, we call the show action of the bridge menu controller. So if we check the bridge menu controller. If this bridge component is enabled, so if the client supports it, we'll stop the we'll prevent the default behavior of clicks in the detail summary, and we'll notify the native side, so we will get all the items, all the elements in the drop down. So if we go to drop down link or button, because we can have buttons in the drop down, you can see that we are registering the targets over here, the bridge targets for the menu component. So we get all the links in the HTML and we send them to the native side to display a native menu. So once when the user clicks, we'll get the index that they just of the item that they chose, when the items that they were presented with, and we'll just click on that item in the web view. So that's why we see, like, when we click on edit, it navigates to the edit page, but the edit page is a modal, so that's why you see the X symbol over here and all that. So this native shell around the web view over here is actually a custom view in Android. So I have this view over here that has the native navigation. So it has the bottom navigation, the floating action button, and the toolbar at the top, and inside of it is the web view. So we can see the XML over here. This is Android, so there's XML involved. So yeah, and this fragment screen in our configuration JSON, you can see that screen is only used for the chirps or settings routes. So any other route that we visit, it's not going to show you the bottom navigation and the floating action button. So we are only interested in showing the bottom navigation on these two screens, and the floating action button actually only on the chirps screen. So if we go to the home button over here, so there is a decision over here, there's some condition over here to hide or show the button, the float action button, depending on which screen is actually visible to the user. So that's why you see it over here. You don't see it in the settings page, but it's actually the same fragment. So if we add it over here, we saw that already, but if we delete the chirp, you can see that we have a float, an actual native toast, which is different from the one we have on the web. So on the web, we just have a regular flash message, right? So over here, we don't actually do anything fancy. We just show the web version of it. And on the mobile, that works like our web notice component, the partial, which shows each flash message. It actually uses a bridge toast controller. So when the bridge toast connects to the DOM, when an element using this bridge toast component connects to the DOM, we are sending a message to the native to show the message that we want to, and we are deleting the element. So we are not actually showing that element to the user on the mobile native. We are showing the notification fully native on mobile. So that's cool. Also over here, you can see how that behavior works for the upload. So let me actually put the dark mode. So we can visit the edit profile, which you see the mobile screen over here, and we can interact with the camera or pick an image from the gallery. If we select the camera, we can see the Android emulation of a picture, which is this little guy over here. We can take a picture of that, and that gets uploaded, gets added to the form. So the same preview logic that we have over here on the web is driving this version over here. So I didn't actually have to write anything custom. It's just a few lines of JavaScript to get this preview working, and that's it. We don't have to do anything fancy. So for the date of birth, we have a date input over here. So this presents the native date picker over here. Date time, birth time also uses the input type time. So you can do that. Selects are also presented natively because that's how the phone works with select inputs on the web. So it presents them natively. So yeah, that's the application. That's the Hotwire starter kit. This starter kit example is available in the repository, in the Hotwire Laravel repository. But there is also the Hotwire native demo, which you can see the iOS and the Android applications And yeah, so that's the demo, that's the application, that's Chirps. I'm gonna be updating the Hotwire bootcamp soon, so you have a step-by-step guide on building a version of this application, streamed out version of this native application as well as the web application. So yeah, that's Hotwire. I hope you liked it, and let's get back to the presentation. So we just saw navigation on how to navigate around. We just saw how web forms work and how to use the native virtual keyboards, how all that works. And we saw how the bridge components work when we lift over the form submits to native and how that interaction works. We also saw how toast messages are converted to actual native toast messages. And we also saw another example of how bridge components can be used for the drop downs, right? So the advantages of Hotwire Native is that we can keep our team very small. So we don't need a lot of developers. We can just have a small team that ships a lot of features quickly. We just need a set of UI components, native components, and we can build a lot with just that. So yeah, the 37 Signals folks, they talk about this a lot. They have a small team and they ship features on Hey Calendar, Basecamp itself, Campfire, Workbook, and they will release new SaaS applications this year that are like, they have a small team that powers all that work, which is really cool, I think. And there's also very little code that you need to write native code, at least initially. That depends on how much fidelity you want your application to have. But yeah, initially you don't actually need that much native code. And it's also low maintenance. So Joe Mazzotti mentions this a lot, that he was working on this application that he barely touched it, or maybe never touch it, for like 2 years, 2 or 3 years, and the team was constantly shipping new features every day or every week or something like that, barely touching or not touching at all the native application side. They only had to touch it because Apple sent a message to them saying, hey, you need to use the new SDKs. So what they did was they just opened up the application in Xcode and recompiled to the new SDKs and submitted that to Apple. And yes, then you can spend another set of years without actually touching the native side, because you have the components in place, so you can build new screens with the components that you already have until you need, anything custom, which you can do if you want to. And this also, like, your web application controls how the native components are shown or used. You can control that from your web application. So if you have a bug in one of your native screens, you can just change your path configuration on the server and just let the user use the web view while you ship a new fix to the native component. So you don't actually disturb the user. They can still use the web view, assuming that you have a responsive design and all that in place. They can still use that. Some of the disadvantages of Hotwire Native is that there's no offline story. So if you want to build an offline first kind of experience, you have to go fully native on that screen. So for instance, Hey, they say they have the home screen of Hey, where you see your inbox. That screen is fully native. So all those emails that you have on your inbox, they are cached locally. And so they are stored locally on the device, probably in a SQL database locally. So yeah, to provide that, they have to go fully native on that screen. Also, you get access to the native control, so gestures and stuff like that. So you have access to that. And another disadvantage is that we must know a little bit about the native development. So we need to know a bit of Kotlin and a bit of Swift if we want to maintain. We can also hire Joe or hire someone with native that knows native to build the features on top of what we already have. These are the links. There's a lot of stuff over here, but yeah, I highly recommend going through the links and watching these talks and stuff, because you fully understand what Hotwire Native and Hotwire is all about that way. So yeah, that's what I had. I hope you enjoyed. I know this was a lot, but I kind of wanted to do this kind of stuff, like present more formally what Hotwire is and how you can use Hotwire in your applications, in your Laravel applications, in your whatever backend you use, because Hotwire is backend agnostic. So you can use all that stuff in Go, in Python, in whatever. And yeah, so that's it. That's Hotwire. I hope you like it. I hope you use the Hotwire starter kit. Let me know what you think, and let's build awesome Hotwire applications in Laravel. I'll see you when I see you. Bye.